I still remember the silence after the seventh shot. Not the gunfire, anyone can remember gunfire. I mean the silence that came after that thick ringing kind of quiet where the whole valley seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see if it was finally over. 7 enemy marksmen, 7 of the best the other side had. And every one of them was gone, picked off the ridgeline one by one, while the rest of us were still face down in the dirt praying we'd live long enough to see the sun set. And the person who did it was the one soldier nobody in our unit had ever bothered to take seriously. Let me back up, because if I just told you the ending you wouldn't believe it. I barely believed it, and I was there. Her name was Corporal Iris Lund. We didn't call her that though. For the first 3 weeks we didn't call her much of anything. She was just the new one, or the quiet one, or sometimes, when the older guys were feeling mean, the librarian. That last one stuck for a while. She had this way of sitting apart from the rest of us with a small notebook, writing things down in tiny careful handwriting, and somebody decided that made her a librarian. Funny how a single nickname can make a whole group of grown men stop seeing a person clearly. I was 23 then, a radio operator, not brave, not smart, just young and trying not to die. We were stationed at a forward post in a country I won't name, in a stretch of mountains where the air was thin and the wind never seemed to stop. The kind of place where the cold gets into your bones at night and the sun tries to cook you alive by noon. You learn to hate weather in a place like that. You learn to hate a lot of things. Iris arrived on a supply truck in the middle of a dust storm. I remember because half of us had bets going on whether the truck would even make it up the last stretch of road. When it finally rolled in, coughing and groaning, she climbed down with one duffel bag and a long case slung across her back, and she just stood there for a second, looking up at the ridges around us like she was reading them. Sergeant Brack, our squad leader, a big slab of a man with a voice like gravel, looked her over and didn't bother hiding what he thought. "They sent me a kid," he said. She didn't argue, she just shouldered her bag and asked where she should put her gear. That was the first thing I noticed about her. She never argued. Most new soldiers, when they get tested, they push back, they puff up, they try to prove something with their mouth. Iris just went quiet and waited. At the time I thought it was weakness. I learned later it was the opposite. Quiet people are usually quiet because they've got nothing to prove to anybody but themselves. The long case stayed in her tent for the first week. Nobody really asked about it. We figured it was a scoped rifle, sure, but we had 3 other guys who claimed to be marksmen, and frankly none of them were anything special. Hitting a paper target on a calm range is one thing. Hitting a man who's moving in wind at distance, when your own hands are shaking because you know if you miss he won't, that's another world entirely. We assumed she was just another body who'd been handed a fancy weapon she didn't really know how to use. We were idiots. The first crack in that assumption came on maybe her 5th or 6th day. Brack had us out doing a sweep of a dry riverbed about 2 kilometers from the post. Routine, boring, the kind of patrol where the biggest danger is rolling your ankle on a loose rock. We stopped to rest in the shade of a collapsed bridge, and somebody, I think it was Dov, one of our marksmen, started bragging about a shot he made back at training. 400 meters, he said, maybe 450, dead center. The guys made the appropriate impressed noises. Iris was sitting a little ways off, sketching the ridgelines in that notebook of hers. She didn't look up, but Dov saw her, and Dov never could leave a thing alone. "Hey, librarian," he called out, "you ever actually shoot that thing, or you just carry it for the look?" She finally lifted her eyes. There was no anger in them, that was the strange part, just a kind of patience, the way you'd look at a child who keeps asking the same question. "I shoot it," she said. "Yeah, how far?" She looked back down at her notebook. "Far enough." The guys laughed because they took that as her ducking the question, but I was watching her hands and I noticed something. While Dov had been bragging about his 400 meters, she had drawn a tiny mark on her sketch, a little spot on the far ridge where a single dead tree stood against the sky. I didn't think anything of it then, I only understood it later. That ridge was, I'd guess, close to 900 meters away, and she'd marked the tree like it was nothing, like it was just within reach. The days dragged on. The thing about a forward post is that 90% of it is waiting, and the waiting is what breaks people. You sit. You clean your weapon for the 3rd time that day, you think too much. You start watching the others, looking for cracks because there's nothing else to look at, and I watched Iris more than anyone, mostly because she confused me. She was good at things she had no reason to be good at. She fixed Henning's jammed sidearm in about 90 seconds after he'd been swearing at it for 10 minutes. She knew which canned rations had gone bad just by the dent in the lid. When the medic, a soft-spoken older man named Avi, got a fever one night, it was Iris who sat up with him, not because anyone told her to, but because she'd noticed he was shaking and nobody else had. She never made a show of any of it. She just did things quietly, the way water finds the lowest path. And every evening, no matter how tired we all were, she did the same ritual. She'd take that long case out, sit cross-legged on the ground and open it. Inside was the rifle bolt-action scoped older than I expected with a stock that had been worn smooth in places from years of handling. She'd clean it, check it, run her fingers along it like she was reading something written in the metal. Then she'd close the case again. She never fired it. Not once in all those early weeks did any of us hear her take a single shot. Brack hated that. To him, a soldier who didn't train was a soldier who couldn't fight. He wrote her about it more than once. "You ever planning to actually use that thing?" he asked her one evening, standing over her while she cleaned it. "When there's something worth using it on," she said. "That's not how it works, Corporal. You train, you stay sharp." She looked up at him, and again, no challenge, just that steady patience. "I am sharp," she said. "I just don't waste rounds proving it to people who have already decided I can't." Brack didn't have an answer for that. He walked off muttering. And I noticed a couple of the older guys exchange looks, the kind of looks that say maybe there's more to her than we thought, before they shook it off and went back to ignoring her. It's a strange thing, how a group decides what to believe about a person. We'd all sorted Iris into a box on her first day, quiet, small, soft, not a real soldier, and even when she kept giving us reasons to open that box and look again, we mostly just kept it shut. It was easier. People hate admitting they were wrong about someone. I think we'd have happily gone the whole tour underestimating her, if the mountains hadn't made that impossible. Because the mountains had teeth, and they were about to show them. It started with a missing patrol. A unit from a neighboring post, 8 men, went out on a routine sweep and didn't come back when they were supposed to. No radio contact, nothing. At first command assumed equipment failure, bad terrain, the usual, but hours passed, then a full day, and the silence started to feel like a different kind of silence. The kind with a body count behind it. The word came down that we were to move out at dawn and search the corridor where they'd gone missing, a long, narrow valley between 2 ridges, the only real passage through that part of the range. Brack gathered us that night. I remember his face in the lantern light, how the easy meanness had gone out of it, replaced by something harder and older. "Listen up," he said. 8 men went into that valley and 8 men disappeared. That doesn't happen by accident. Somebody's set up in there, probably on the high ground, probably waiting." He paused. "We go in careful, we go in low, and if anybody so much as feels wrong about a piece of ground, you say so. Understood?" We understood. That night I couldn't sleep. None of us could, really, except maybe Iris. I got up to use the latrine and found her sitting outside her tent, the rifle case open beside her, the rifle resting across her knees. She wasn't cleaning it this time. She was just holding it, looking out at the dark shapes of the ridges where we'd be walking in a few hours. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe I needed to hear another human voice. I sat down a little ways from her. "Can't sleep either," I said. "Not really my night for sleeping," she said. We sat in silence for a bit. Then, because I was young and scared and couldn't help myself, I asked her the thing everyone had been wondering. "Can you actually use that thing, like really use it?" She was quiet for a long moment. When she answered, she didn't look at me. She kept her eyes on the ridges. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 8, she said. "Not for war, for hunting up in the cold country where I grew up. He used to say a good shot isn't about the gun or even the eye, it's about being still, stiller than everything around you. You let the whole world get loud and busy and panicked, and you just stay still. And when the moment comes, you take it, one breath, one shot, no second guessing." She finally turned and looked at me, and in the dark her eyes seemed very calm. "Everybody out here is loud," she said. "All that bragging, all that noise, that's fear mostly. They're trying to fill up the quiet so they don't have to sit in it." She looked back at the ridges. "I'm not afraid of the quiet, that's the only difference." I didn't really understand what she meant, not then, but I'd remember it the very next day when the quiet she was talking about came down on all of us like a hammer, and I watched it swallow 7 men whole. We moved out as the sky was just beginning to gray. The valley was exactly as bad as Brack feared. Narrow, steep walls on both sides, all rock and scrub and shadow. The kind of place where a single person in the right position could control everything below. We crept in close to the eastern wall, using the bigger boulders for cover, nobody saying a word. The only sounds were our boots on the loose stone and the wind moaning through the gaps in the high rocks. We found the missing patrol about a kilometer in. I won't describe it. Some things you don't put into words out of respect if nothing else. I'll just say that whoever had done it knew exactly what they were doing, and they'd done it from above, from positions we couldn't even see. 8 men, not one of them had gotten off more than a couple of rounds before it was over. The shooting had been that precise, that patient, that cruel. Brack knelt by the bodies and I saw his jaw tighten. He keyed his radio to report it, and that was the moment the trap closed. The first shot took Dov. I didn't even hear it coming. That's the thing about a good marksman at distance, by the time the sound reaches you it's already done. Dov, our loudmouth, our 400-meter hero, just dropped without a word. 1 second standing, the next folded on the rocks. We didn't even have time to be horrified before the second shot snapped off the boulder next to my head, close enough that stone chips cut my cheek. Down! Get down! Brack was screaming it, and we threw ourselves flat, scrambling for any cover we could find. More shots came, methodical, unhurried, each one finding the gaps between our hiding spots like the shooters could see straight through the rock. We were pinned completely. There were at least, we counted later, 7 of them spread along the western ridge in positions we couldn't pinpoint, working us over like men shooting fish in a barrel. Every time someone tried to move, a round would crack down within inches of them. We couldn't advance. We couldn't retreat. We couldn't even lift our heads long enough to fire back, and even if we could have, our weapons weren't built for the distances they were shooting from. I remember lying there with my face pressed into the cold stone, my heart going so hard I could feel it in my teeth, thinking with a strange, flat certainty, this is where I die. Right here, in this stupid valley, and I'm not even going to see the man who does it. And then through all the chaos I heard a voice, calm, almost gentle. It was Iris. I will never forget the look on Brack's face when she said it. We were pinned down by 7 enemy marksmen who had already killed a full patrol and were in the middle of killing us, and this small quiet woman we'd spent 3 weeks calling, the librarian had just said, in the same tone you'd use to ask someone to pass the salt, that she could handle it. Brack was lying maybe 10 feet from her behind a low spine of rock with blood on his sleeve from where a round had grazed him. He turned his head and stared at her like he didn't understand the language she was speaking. You can what? I can take them, she said again, but I need a few things from you and I need you to trust me for about 10 minutes. There was another crack. A round hit the ground between 2 of our guys, Henning and a kid named Saul, and both of them flinched so hard they nearly rolled out of cover. We were running out of time and everyone knew it. Brack looked from her to the western ridge, then back at her. I watched something happen in his face, a man being forced, in the worst possible moment, to admit he might have been wrong about someone. What do you need, he said, not a question, a surrender. She'd already opened the case. She'd done it while we were all still frozen, moving with this unhurried economy like the bullets snapping around us were just weather. The rifle came out and she settled behind a boulder with it, low, flat, almost part of the rock herself. I need them shooting at something other than me, she said. I need to see their muzzle flashes or their movement. Right now they're patient. They're picking us off one at a time and they know we can't reach them, so they're in no hurry. That's the problem. A patient shooter doesn't show himself. She glanced back at us. So we make them impatient. Somebody needs to draw fire, not get hit, just give them a target worth taking. Move something, a helmet on a stick, anything. Henning, of all people, was the one who did it. He pulled off his helmet, jammed it onto the end of his rifle, and on Brack's nod he lifted it just over the lip of the rock and jerked it sideways like a man making a break for better cover. The reaction was instant. 3 shots almost on top of each other hammered the spot, and in that same instant Iris went absolutely still. I've tried many times since to describe what she became in those next few minutes, and I always fall short. The closest I can get is this: everything about her went quiet, not just her body, her whole presence. The fear that was screaming in the rest of us, the panic, the noise, all of it seemed to flow around her without touching her. Her father's words came back to me. You let the whole world get loud and panicked and you just stay still. She wasn't frozen. She was the opposite of frozen. She was the one calm point in a world gone to pieces. 2 o'clock high, she murmured almost to herself. The cleft in the rock just below the dead juniper, he moved when Henning did. A pause, a single slow breath. 800 meters, crosswind from the left, maybe 12. I didn't even see her finger move. The rifle simply spoke, one flat, enormous crack that rolled down the valley, and somewhere up on that western ridge, a man who had been killing us for the last several minutes stopped existing. One, she said quietly, not like a boast, like a man keeping count of his breaths. There was a beat of stunned silence from the ridge. I think they were as surprised as we were. They'd been hunting helpless prey, and the prey had just bitten back from a distance they hadn't thought possible. For a moment, the firing stopped entirely. Then it started again, harder, angrier, and that was their mistake. Iris had been right. Angry shooters get sloppy, impatient shooters move. There, she breathed. 11 o'clock, lower than the first. He's repositioning. He thinks he can flank us. Another breath, another crack, another silence where a man used to be, too. Brack had stopped even pretending to give orders. He was just watching her now, the way the rest of us were, with something between awe and disbelief. The kid, Saul, had his mouth hanging open. Avi the medic had crawled up beside me and I heard him whisper, "How is she doing that?" And I had no answer because I'd been there the whole 3 weeks and I hadn't seen this coming any more than he had. The third one was harder. He'd learned from the first two. He stayed put, stayed hidden, refused to take the bait. The valley went still again, that terrible patient stillness, and we all knew the others were doing the same now, going to ground, waiting for Iris to make a mistake. She didn't rush. That was the thing that struck me most. With men's lives hanging on every second, including her own, she didn't rush. She lay there behind that boulder and she waited, scanning the ridge through her scope, her breathing slow and even while the rest of us sweated and prayed. "He's good," she said softly. "He's not going to move for movement, he's going to wait for sound." She thought for a moment. "Brack, when I tell you, have everyone fire one volley to the left side of the ridge, make noise, make him think we're focused there." Brack passed the word in a hiss. We readied our weapons, and on her signal we let loose a ragged burst of fire toward the left of the ridge, the most we've been able to do since the ambush started. It was nothing, really. Our rounds couldn't have reached the shooters with any accuracy, but that wasn't the point. The point was the noise, and the noise worked. Somewhere on the right, a man who'd been certain everyone was looking the other way lifted his head a few crucial inches to find a better firing position. "Greg. 3. I started, despite everything, to feel something rise in my chest that I hadn't felt since the ambush began. Hope. Stupid, fragile hope. 3 of them down. 3 of the men who'd killed an entire patrol and pinned us in the dirt gone because a woman we'd refused to take seriously was better at this than all of them combined. But 3 down meant 4 left, and the 4 who remained were the ones smart enough to still be alive. They went completely silent now. No more firing, no more movement. They understood what they were up against and they changed their game. They were going to wait us out. They were going to make Iris come find them blind, in terrain they knew and we didn't, with the sun climbing higher and our water running lower. A long time passed. I don't know how long time stops meaning much when you're lying behind a rock waiting to find out if you'll live. The wind picked up. It moaned through the high rocks, kicking up little spirals of dust along the valley floor, and somewhere a loose stone rattled down a slope. Iris didn't move. She lay behind her boulder, scanning, patient, while the rest of us tried not to so much as breathe too loud. "They're spread out now," she said finally, very quietly. "2 left side, 2 right. They want us to break cover. Anybody who moves dies." She paused. "So nobody moves but me." "What?" Brack hissed. "You're not going up there alone." "I'm not going anywhere," she said, "but I can't see all 4 positions from here. I need a better angle there." She nodded toward a shelf of rock about 30 meters from us, higher up, exposed for maybe 4 or 5 seconds of crawling. "From there I can see both sides of the ridge, but it means moving across open ground." "They'll cut you in half," Brack said. She looked at him, and for the first time I saw something other than calm in her eyes. Not fear, exactly. Resolve. The look of someone who has already decided to do a hard thing and has made peace with the cost. "Maybe," she said, "but if I stay here they wait us out and we die slow when the water's gone or the sun does it for them. At least this way somebody's doing something." She started working the bolt, checking her rounds. "Cover doesn't have to hit anyone, it just has to make them keep their heads down for 5 seconds. Can you give me 5 seconds? Brack was quiet. Then he looked back at the rest of us and there was no meanness left in him at all, only the weight of a man asking his people to do something dangerous because there was nothing better left to ask. "On her word," he said, "everything we've got, both sides of the ridge, 5 seconds, make it loud." I checked my own weapon with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking. Beside me, Avi murmured something that might have been a prayer. Iris coiled herself behind the boulder, the rifle slung tight across her back, every muscle ready. "Now," she said. And we opened up. The valley exploded with our fire, wild, inaccurate, useless, except for the wall of noise it threw up against that ridge. And in the middle of it, Iris broke from cover and ran. I have replayed those 5 seconds 1,000 times. The way she moved, low, fast, no hesitation, no panic, just pure committed motion across that exposed ground. I saw a round kick up dust at her heels. I saw another spark off the rock just ahead of her. The enemy hadn't all kept their heads down. At least one of them was good enough, fast enough to track her even through our covering fire, and I watched, my heart in my throat, as the dust rounds walked closer and closer to her flying boots. She dove the last few feet and slammed into cover behind the rock shelf just as a shot cracked off the exact spot where she'd been a quarter second before. We stopped firing, the echo rolled away down the valley. And then there was that silence again, the waiting silence. Because now she was up there, alone, exposed, with 4 trained killers who knew exactly where she'd just gone to ground. I held my breath, we all did. From where I lay, I could just see the edge of the rock shelf and the small shape of her behind it, perfectly still once more, the rifle out now and settled, her eye to the scope. The 4th shooter, the fast one, the one who'd nearly caught her in the open, was somewhere on the right. And I think he made the same mistake the others had. I think he was so sure he'd see her move first that he leaned out to find her. He didn't get the chance. 3 left. You'd think after watching 4 of their own get picked off one by a single shooter they couldn't even see that the remaining men would have broken, run, lost their nerve. But they didn't, and that told me something about who we were really up against. These weren't conscripts or amateurs, these were professionals, the kind who'd killed an entire patrol without losing a man, the kind who didn't rattle easy. And now there were 3 of them, and they were angry, and they knew that the only way they walked out of that valley was over the body of the woman on the rock shelf. They changed tactics again. 2 of them started laying down steady, suppressing fire on Iris's position, pinning her behind the shelf, while the 3rd, I figured this out only afterward, piecing it together with the others, began working his way down and around, using the rocks, trying to get an angle where he could shoot her from the side where her cover meant nothing. It was smart. It was exactly what I would have been afraid of. 2 to keep her head down, 1 to flank and finish. And from where she lay, I pressed to that scope, fighting just to keep from being hit by the suppressing fire. There was no way she could see the 3rd man coming. But we could. That's the part nobody tells you about a fight like that. It's not one person. It never is, no matter how the story gets told afterward. Iris was extraordinary, but she wasn't alone, and the moment she went up on that shelf she'd handed the rest of us a job, even if she hadn't said so out loud. Our job was to be her eyes for the things she couldn't see. It was Saul, the kid, the youngest of us, the one who'd had his mouth hanging open 10 minutes earlier, who spotted the flanker. He grabbed my arm so hard it left a bruise and pointed, low along the base of the western wall where a shape was slipping rock to rock, getting closer, getting an angle. "He's flanking her," Saul whispered, his voice cracking. "He's going to flank her and she can't see him." I had a radio, that's all I had. I wasn't a shooter, I wasn't brave, I was a 23-year-old who'd spent the whole fight with his face in the dirt. But I had a radio, and Iris had a small earpiece she'd clipped in before she ran, and in that second I understood it was the only thing in the world that mattered. I keyed the radio, my hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped it. "Iris," I said, "Iris, you've got a man flanking left, base of the wall, maybe 60 meters out and closing, he's going to come around your blind side." For one horrible moment there was no answer, and I thought maybe the earpiece had fallen out, maybe she couldn't hear me over the gunfire, maybe I was about to listen to her die. Then, calm as still water, her voice came back through the radio. "I hear you, keep talking, where is he now?" So I did. God help me, I did the only useful thing I did that entire day. I lay there behind a rock and I talked her onto a man she couldn't see, while 2 other shooters tried to kill her and the suppressing fire chewed up the rock around her head. "He's behind the big square boulder," I said. "The flat-topped one, he's reloading, I think. He keeps looking up at your shelf." "How far past the dead bush?" "Just past it, 10 meters. He's going to break for the next rock, the one with the split in it. When he moves, tell me the instant his back foot leaves the ground." I waited, my whole body was one held breath. The flanker crouched, gathered himself and broke from cover, sprinting for the split rock. "Now," I said, now. She'd already fired before I finished the word. The flanker dropped mid-stride and didn't get up. "5," she said, and then softer just for me, "Good eyes." 2 words? I'm not ashamed to say I've held onto those 2 words for the rest of my life. From the soldier I'd helped dismiss as a librarian for 3 weeks. Good eyes, I think I'd have walked back into that valley 100 times to hear them. But it wasn't over. 2 shooters remained and they had just watched their flanker fall, which meant they knew their clever plan had failed, which meant they were out of clever plans. Now it was just the raw thing, 2 of them, one of her, and the suppressing fire was still coming. Here is the part I understand the least, even now. Because the next thing Iris did made no sense to me at the time, and only later did I see the cold, brilliant logic of it. She stopped hiding. For 3 weeks she had refused to fire a single wasted round, refused to show off, refused to prove anything to anyone. And now, with two killers trying to pin her down, she did the most dangerous thing imaginable. She rose up just enough to be seen. She gave them a target. I screamed into the radio, "Iris, what are you doing? Get down." But she'd done the math the rest of us couldn't. Two shooters, both focused on her position, both certain. The instant she showed herself, both of them fired at her, and in doing so, both of them gave away their exact positions with their muzzle flashes at the exact same moment and committed to a target that was no longer where their bullets were going. Because she was already moving. She'd shown herself for less than a heartbeat and then dropped and rolled to a second firing position 3 feet to the right, one she'd picked out and prepared, and as their rounds smashed harmlessly into the rock she'd just left, she came up with the location of both of them burned into her mind. The sixth shot came so fast on the heels of her roll that I almost missed it. "Zick," she said. And the seventh man, the last one, the final marksman of the seven who had walked into that valley certain they would walk out, the seventh man, I am told, tried to run. He understood, finally, what we'd all understood several minutes too late, that there was something on that rock shelf far more dangerous than anything he'd ever faced, and that staying meant dying. He didn't get 50 meters. "7," she said. And then came the silence I told you about at the very beginning. That thick, ringing, holy silence where the whole valley seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if it was really over. It was over. For a long moment nobody moved. We lay in the dirt where the ambush had pinned us, hardly daring to believe it, listening to the wind and our own ragged breathing. Then one by one we began to lift our heads. Brack first, then Henning, then the rest, rising slow and disbelieving from behind our rocks, looking up at the western ridge where 7 men had been killing us, and now there was nothing but stone and wind and the dead juniper standing against the sky. And up on the shelf the woman who'd done it slowly lowered her rifle. She didn't cheer, she didn't celebrate, she didn't even look pleased. She just sat back against the rock very still and lowered her head, and I realized after a moment that she was simply breathing. In and out, slow and even, the way her father had taught her. Coming back, I think, from wherever that terrible stillness had taken her to being a person again. We made our way up to her, all of us, our legs unsteady. Brack got there first. This huge, gravel-voiced man who'd called her a kid on her first day stood over her, and for a long moment he couldn't find any words at all. Then he crouched down to her level and he said the only thing worth saying. "I'm sorry," he said. "I was wrong about you, about all of it, I'm sorry." Iris looked up at him. There was no triumph in her face, no "I told you so," none of the things a person would have earned the right to, just that same steady calm, and underneath it now a deep and bottomless tiredness. "You don't have to be sorry," she said quietly. "You just have to remember." She looked past him at the rest of us crowded around. "Everybody decided who I was the day I got off that truck, a small quiet woman, not a real soldier, and you weren't being cruel, most of you. You just looked at me and saw what you expected to see." She glanced down at the rifle in her hands. "People do that, they look and they think looking is the same as knowing. It isn't. You never really know what someone's carrying until the day they have to set it down and use it." Nobody said anything. The wind moved through the rocks. We carried our dead out of that valley, Dov and the men from the missing patrol, all of them, and the walk back was the longest of my life. But we walked it alive, all of us who'd survived the first volley, and we walked it because of her. I served alongside Iris Lund for another year after that. We never called her the librarian again. We never called her anything but corporal, said with a respect that none of us had given her when she earned the right to it the most, which was before she'd fired a single shot, back when she was just quietly fixing jams and sitting up with feverish men and asking nothing from anyone. That's the thing I've carried longest. The 7 shots were extraordinary, but she was extraordinary the whole time. We just hadn't bothered to look. She left the service before I did. We lost touch the way people do. I don't even know if she's still alive. But there's a thing she said that night before the valley, sitting outside her tent with the rifle across her knees, watching the dark ridges where she'd do the impossible the next day, and it stayed with me longer than anything else from those years. She said the loud ones are loud because they're afraid of the quiet, that the world gets noisy and panicked and everybody rushes to fill the silence so they don't have to sit in it, and that the only difference between her and the rest of us was that she wasn't afraid of the quiet. I've thought about that for the rest of my life, about how we walk past the quiet ones every day, the ones who don't brag, don't push, don't fill the air. We file them away as small, as soft, as nothing much, and we're almost always wrong. Because the strongest person I ever knew never raised her voice once. She just stayed still when the whole world was screaming. And when the moment came, she took it.